All right, hello and welcome to Between the Liars with Ryan, Josh,
Hello there.
Marcelo.
Hello, everyone.
And that's it for tonight. We'll get some more people in here eventually. I think the start of the semester is a rough time to kind of get everybody on board. Austin is still working 40 hours a week, and we've got people in law school. Having brilliant people on the show means they're also busy with their real lives. So we'll get to them eventually. All right. Today we're going to be discussing congressional members investing in stocks and why it's problematic. You would think at face value people would understand that, especially Congress, but here we are. We're also going to talk about some alternatives because, as much as you all know, I love to complain about the federal government and government in general. I think we'd like to have some actual proposed solutions that maybe they'll take it under advisement. But before we do that, this is your reminder that we are on Instagram. We have a Facebook page. We have Twitter. Our Twitter following is really, really sad. Go make some spam accounts and go follow us. We got like 17 people following us. Don't let the metaverse keep you from hearing about our wonderful announcements. We also have YouTube where you can watch this live stream. And occasionally we have TikTok.
And the reason you want to follow that is because also on occasion we're live at noon central. Not right now, but we do make that happen sometime. And that's an impressive feat. You may not consider that to be a feat, but if you saw all of our schedules, you would know. Certainly, as I will be at dinner this Saturday, so this is why we're here now. So things happen and get in the way. But as always, we try to get it out on noon central. And we stream on Facebook and YouTube. We always love to see you there when we are live to interact with your comments and engage. If you have any ideas or just want to come by and annoy us, we welcome that too. But now to pass it off with Marcel to tell us about our music and a special announcement after that.
Yeah, so our music, as always, is courtesy of Andrew Hansley over at Secret Spike Studio 865 Audio. And the hot new single coming out, it's already out, Misty. It's available now on all major streaming platforms. And please check it out. It's fantastic. Jamming with his music all the time. It's great. And the final special announcement is that today that we're recording this, USPS and the federal government has made available a bunch of free at home COVID-19 tests. So if you need some tests, I feel like everyone should take one every once in a while just to know if you're infected or not. But if you go to special.usps.com/test kits, that is special.usps.com/test kits, you can put your contact information, your shipping address. They are shipping 4 free tests to every household that fills their details. Please do. I already ordered some for ours, so it's free, it's easy. Should get them soon, sometime. Stay safe.
And before you think that, this message is sponsored by the U.S. federal government, that is just a freebie. We are not sponsored. So we're going to now transition into some of the ethics bills that are on the Senate floor. And I think Josh has more details on that. But the driving question here, should Congress be allowed to even hold stocks, honestly? Because what we're seeing here is that Congress holds the power to regulate, to incentivize the market. And we also see people holding stocks, which means they have the potential for corruption because you've got a conflict of interest, if nothing else. Josh, why don't you talk to us a little bit about that first ethics bill?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that really has become more apparent to people in recent years has been the growing disparity between Congress and the average person. As of right now, your average Congressperson is worth well over $1 million, and your average American citizen is worth $100,000. That's including assets and property. So that's why your income is not that, but your house may bring you up to that $100,000 mark. But so what's important to then keep in mind is, the people making the rules are 10 times wealthier on average than most Americans, and a lot more than 10 times wealthier than a lot of Americans. So it's certainly been this growing issue that people face. And also, as Ryan pointed out, they're the ones making legislation. So one of the problems is you can have an idea for a bill. And because of the way the bill works, because of the industry you're targeting, because of the regulation it's creating, it could be more harmful to certain companies than others. You may then act on that information and preemptively make a stock market. Now, this is already a crime. It's insider trading. It's the same thing of like when the CEO knows something bad has happened inside of a company and it hasn't been made public yet. And so they dump a whole bunch of their stock and then they come out and say, hey, we just had our worst business quarter on the books. That's insider trading and goes against the rules because it creates an unfair game for the stock market. And the stock market is supposed to be fair and equal, even if it is just glorified gambling. Sorry, stock market bros. So we have two bills that have been proposed by the Senate, one by Senator John Ossoff from Georgia, the Democratic Party, and Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, if I recall correctly, with the Republican Party. And they're largely the same with a few differences. But to really get into the specifics of the first one from Senator Ossoff, the Ban Congressional Stock Trading Act, what this primarily looks to do is force Congress people to put their holdings, only certain holdings though, and I'll get into that, but put their holdings into a blind trust that they cannot then have any say over while they're serving in office. This law would apply to their spouse and any dependent children as well, so children under the age of 18. And this also implies an Ossoff bill explicitly applies to inheritances as well to try to iron out another loophole. Now this only comes down to like individual kind of securities, individual company stocks, individual commodities, individual assets. People are allowed to hold diversified mutual funds. They're allowed to buy U.S. Treasury bonds and a couple of the other kind of more broad, non-specific investments that don't have a conflict of interest element the same way a single company stock may have. So the main thing this bill does is basically say after the bill passes and or after you get sworn in, if you're freshman joining member of Congress, is you have to put your stocks into a blind trust and then it's hands off. That blind trust may sell an asset if it deems it's going to lose you a lot of money. If that happens, they have to notify both the asset holder. But now with this law for Congress, they'll have to publicly release that and say, this movement happened to give a reporting element that's public facing. The other main aspects of this bill is that you can file for an extension, can't have an extension for more than half a year, get 45 days at a time. And the enforcement, rather, how this is done is they have to submit a report to a government agency and to the Senate Ethics Committee that either this action is complete. And once that is done, that documentation is turned over to the public. So basically, it freezes their stocks in place once they join office for their family for the period of time they're in office, and then 180 days afterwards. After that, they're back to being a normal U.S. citizen again.
If they leave, and that's the key.
That is if they leave, yes. So that's much more pertinent to like the House of Representative, who has a lot higher turnover than the Senate, because you may have people who are in for one or two terms, and you don't want to hold something over their head for too long. So this doesn't prevent someone being really wealthy from the get-go, having a whole bunch of investments, putting them in a trust. They'll just sit there. And the other aspect of the blind trust is they may make changes, and you're not going to know the net worth of that trust. And that's why it's a blind trust. You just don't know what's happening. There are some issues though, like if you're heavily invested in the technology center section before you go into office, you have that, and so you can be aware of what you're going to be doing that way. But for the most part, you can set up a blind trust, and you can basically hand off a chunk of money to a company, to an accountant, and be like, "Please go invest this smartly for me and manage this money. This money is in your trust to safeguard and care and manage for me. Don't tell me what's going on about it, though."
What's really interesting is how, at least to avoid the public perception of this bias, you've got people like Nancy Pelosi who allow, their husband to invest, or their spouse, right? Because that way they're not doing anything, but that's that's still, in my opinion, has the potential to, it at least has the appearance, if not it is downright corrupt, because I can pass that information off to my spouse. Like, I guess it depends in your relationship how much you talk about politics, but at the same time, like, you can just kind of pass off that information. Oh yeah, that it's not me doing this. So I don't know.
You could do it very, you don't have to overtly do it. You're like at dinner and you could be like, Microsoft's looking pretty spicy this week, and then it's like, oh, I didn't say anything. So, just I don't know what I said. I feel like there's ways around it, and like, but from what Josh has said about the bill, seems like it would solve most of these issues. They get to invest in the country, which is great, and they don't get to like create new. Obviously, they still have like their pre-existing investments, but no new ones. It makes sense to me.
I think what you mentioned, Josh, earlier about how there's two bills, one from each party at this point, I think that signals, number one, that there's at least the bipartisan front that they are in favor of this. I think that it's important to note that politics is all theater. Like, first of all, these people do not hate each other in general as much as they do at these debates and on screen. Like, there is, at least traditionally, quite a bit of cooperation between them. And you see, like, you see the Bush family and the Clinton family, like, it's not, they hang out together. The Obamas, like, they're still together.
They went to college together. Like, many of these people also went to like Harvard Law School, and
Yep.
like,
So you also see right now people propose bills all the times to appease their base, and then they don't actually have to vote for it. Like, people don't even vote for their own bills sometimes. Like, I propose this, and then it is so corrupt how Congress isn't even held to account for most of their voting procedures, because a lot of times they either do like a blind vote or they have like representatives for themselves. It's like, okay, we know how the House is split, so it doesn't really matter if all the Republicans are here, they're going to lose anyway. So we've just got like 6 people representing each. Like, it's fascinating how they're able to put on this show of, I'm very much in favor of limiting myself. Question is, will they do it? Like, will they even vote for this? And then if it goes through, will they even enforce it?
Yeah, and I think the enforcement highlights a problem and one of the key differences between Senator Hawley bill and Senator Ossoff's bill is, in Hawley's bill, there is specific call to the Government Accountability Office for every 2 years to do an audit of the Senate and the House to make sure they are still in compliance of this law. However, as much as, that nice sounds, having the Government Accountability Office overseeing this, and don't get me wrong, the Government Accountability Office is made up of primarily career professionals who work very hard at their jobs and take it very seriously. And so don't want to throw too much shade at them. However, the people that hire, manage, and oversee and coordinate the Government Accountability Office are appointed by the House, because it is a legislative branch government entity. So at the end of the day, they report to Congress. So yes, it's an oversight, but it's done by people you kind of put there and let be there, even if they aren't the ones managing the day-to-day operations at the Government Accountability Office. It's one of those reasons of when the Attorney General goes, trust me, everything the president is entirely legal. You might be skeptical. You might trust the dedicated lawyer that's worked 20 years at the DOJ. You're not too sure about that AG, though. and so there's a similar problem that can happen with this situation of they're overseeing themselves. And these bills also use the ethics committees in both the Senate and the House to oversee this as well, but those are made up of members of Congress. So the only enforcement and oversight is themselves.
I want to go back to something that Ryan said a little bit ago, is that, many of these moves are political and they're in fact designed not to pass, but there's like, people want this, so we're going to do it because we want to be good to them. And like, apparently we want to be good to them. And I feel like that speaks a lot on the fact that, when we came into the show, like when we're talking about today's topic, we were like, nobody's really against this. Like, well, most people, your average person will not be against any of this. This is widely popular. Polls say it. we're saying, and obviously, we're better than polls. So I feel like this is a topic that is just very nonpartisan, and that should Congress people have be able to trade these things because it's all an obvious side of corruption? Most people would say no. And then so we're here to discuss mainly why it's not happening, and also the ramifications of all of this, of it not passing, and the appearance that it does, which is, I don't think it brings a lot of confidence to people that even a thing that is this popular is not passing still.
Even if it,
there's that growing list of disconnect of, you go out and do polls of is this legislation, or this policy action popular in the public? Yeah, 55-60% of the nation says, yeah. Will Congress do it? No. Yeah. There's a ton of issues like that out there.
Yeah, I mean, well, we've seen similar things with term limits. Like, most of the American population is in favor of term limits. At least the people I've surveyed. Kidding. But we see that, we have these problems with Congress, and yet it comes down to the self-enforcement. You have, I guess, almost a tautological structure in which you have Congress appoints the people who then choose what comes before Congress, what charges are brought, if there were to be any in this case. If it's going to play out like the court of law for them, and it's the people that they've appointed, I'm going to have major questions over whether or not this is going to actually be above board, even if they were to pass this. And
it's not even that. The charges and the investigation is primarily the Government Accountability Office audits. The charges and procedurals is still all handled internally by the Ethics Committee. So it's not even appointed by, it's literally just them.
Oh my gosh. Well, right now, the penalty is something like $200 if a congressional member were to be unethical with this type of a situation. The way that I would view it, if I were any of these congressional members, is great. Hit me with a $200 fine. I just made thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on the stocks that I invested in. I mean, it's a business investment at that point. So honestly, regardless of whether the fine's more strict, I'm not sure that that's even going to be a deterrent, depending on how much they raise it. Granted, I'm not quite sure how much they're planning on raising that fine for violations, but
I'm looking real fast to see it on
the beauty of
soft
Google
bills.
real time.
I do know, and I'll comment while I am looking here a little bit, is that in Hawley's bill, they come after your income tax, and they come after the money you made from the deal. So it has a bit better of a turnaround of being like, great, you made all this money, that's ours now. You were in violation of the law. I think off bills just significantly increases the fines. I'm not entirely sure of what it increases it to, but I do know it was at least above kind of a wrist slap that it is now. Because you even see courts, a court will fine, Google or Facebook some privacy violation for $50 million. And you're like, yeah, cool. That company's worth $1 trillion, approaching $1 trillion. Or Microsoft now sitting at $2.7 trillion, and some regulator hits them with a couple $100 million fine. Whatever. Microsoft has billions of dollars cash on hand. So you need to match the penalties up with, the profit they're making out of them. Because if it is just, a penalty and it's not significant, then that penalty just becomes a fee of the business transaction that you might pay at a bank or anywhere else. It's just, here's this, transaction fee, whatever. And companies look at it that way. And mega rich people, I assume, will behave kind of like companies. At least they seem to do.
I'll be honest, and I'm going to throw out, I don't know that I call this a hot take, or it's an early hot take, depending on how you want to look at it. But here's my proposal for how to fix this. Let them be stripped of their position. If you're going to actually do this, let their job be on the line. You want to be a normal citizen? Go be a normal citizen. I don't see how there would be another penalty that they couldn't just wrap up, like you mentioned, Josh, into just, well, it's a fee of the transaction. I just don't see how that would be possible. Strip them of their position.
So fire them.
Yep.
Like you're
That
fired.
congressional seat is now available. Like I'm pretty sure that would be a pretty solid deterrent for at least most of these people.
Right, and we're trying not to get there, which is why these bills, or hopefully if they pass, when they pass, are trying to not get to the point, because it's an inherent breach of trust, of our trust, but also the corruption, the inherent corruption that comes with like having the possibility to do this. And even if you don't act on it, there's always the possibility of doing it.
Yep.
So let's not get that far. Like, let's not fire them to just prevent them from doing it, and then you don't have people investigating themselves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, I'm really just proposing that as a deterrent. Like, I think that, if you, like you mentioned, Marcelo, the goal is to not have people do it. I mean, you have a severe penalty. Why do people pay taxes? They don't want to go to prison from the IRS. Like, I mean, you can, if you're going to set up the structure. Well, this is really interesting. Here's the positions of the federal government and the salary that they get. So if you're a senator or in the House of Representatives, so any member of Congress, you make $174,000 a year. If you're the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, makes $223,500 a year. So Chuck Schumer, who's the majority leader in the Senate, and then Mitch McConnell, who'll be the minority leader, and then whoever the House of Representatives minority and majority party leaders are, they make $193,400 annually. We're paying them massive salaries already. So it's not like they theoretically are passing legislation, but they're not even doing that. So I mean, you're getting paid to hold a prestigious title, put up a big fight, run for re-election, rinse, repeat as long as you're in there. And for some of these people, they're lifers. Like, it's not like we're paying them poor salaries at this point. I would love a job with those salaries with what they have to do.
Also, there's a subtle tie to how lobbying works in this too. So you have a company and you're trying to get certain legislation passed. If a particular group of senators, or even though they have nothing in common, but say owning your stock, you may be able to go up to them and say, hey, do you know what would be a really good idea for a piece of legislation? Or do you know what's a really bad piece of legislation? And you bribe them this way. And insider trading happens in this reverse too. A company will pay a Congress member with corporate information to make the correct investments. That is also considered illegal in insider trading, but just as the same as, working on a piece of legislation and making a transaction, happens. Or what was it here recently in the Senate Intelligence Committee, where that New York senator made a whole bunch of stock moves when he got the initial CIA reports about the severity and estimated impacts that COVID-19 was going to have. So he liquidated a whole bunch of his assets and got out early before the stock market crashes. That's a betrayal of not only the confidential information and the trust of the government officials, of confidential government, but it's, a betrayal of the faith of the public people in the government when a member of the government so brazenly acts in such a self-serving fashion. And so, actions like these help people have faith and give legitimacy to our government. And so I think that's a certain part of, like, as corporate influence over our politics has become more and more a concern, putting in legal mechanisms that help draw a barrier between, what's going on in the corporate world and what our legislators think is best for the country are more separated. Like, yes, the corporations need to make money for us to succeed, but we shouldn't be willing to sacrifice our stuff for their sake. Like, this is reverse. This is all about the American people. The government does not exist to serve itself. The economy does not exist to serve itself. These things are tools to better the life of the American public.
Well, everything that they pass, think about it this way. If they give them tax incentives, tax breaks, if they pass legislation that restricts the flow of economy, if they pass things that are more progressive but have economic repercussions, they know this. They know how many votes they have. They know when it's going into effect. They write the legislation to do so, which means that they are privy to the information that says at this point or in the near future, we expect a slow in the economy, which means I'm going to shift around the money that I have American people don't have that. Or even, Josh, we could even combine what I mentioned earlier about the theatrical aspect and then kind of the coalitions that are formed. Congress can come forward and say, guess what? My party and your party can look really, really good if we pretend that we're in favor of this because we're going to propose this bill. You all vote against it, right? So like you can see that too, where there's the potential for corruption there. The collaboration or the coalitions that are formed that manipulate the markets, like it is ripe for these types of corruption.
With trusting government being at an all-time low, I feel like, what Josh said, that, this would just make people trust it a little more. Seems like we should really be looking for more ways to do that. at least at this point in time, like as the divide grows bigger and everything just gets a little more political, maybe a little more than just a little. I feel like trusting government should remain as high as we can possibly make it.
I mean, personally, I'm less about trusting my government and more about imposing limitations on it that it can't actually, go forward with these things. So
you should love this, right?
I do, yeah. I would.
But this is great. Because
yep. Yeah. If this went through, I'm still going to have my skepticism of how it's actually going to be enforced. But I mean, it would certainly be a better position than where we're sitting right now, because if all they've got right now is about a $200 fine, there's nothing restricting them. So I would majorly be in favor of either of these things going through if that's what it would do.
Like in theory, this is great, right? Because government is supposed to self-regulate, and right now, obviously, they have not been able to self-regulate their own historic deals with the information that they have. So they're the ones who need to pass a bill to regulate themselves. And so hopefully this will get the job done, right? And with this, you could be able to say a little more confidently, like they know what they're doing, and they're actually keeping themselves from illegally profiting off of, the entire country's movements.
So do you guys think we should rethink the incentive structure for Congress? Like with as much as they're making and the information that they're privy to, and the fact that they're not giving us our money's worth, right? They're not really passing things. They're not even showing up to vote half the time. They let a small portion represent them. Do you think we should maybe tie what they're paid to their attendance, or is there a way we might rethink the incentive structure to try to get them to actually start working for the people again?
Yeah, so this is my college classroom plan to fix Congress. That's called every time they miss a day that they're in session, they just lose that as a percentage towards their final grade. I mean, pay. So what happens? So what needs to happen is just every time they're not there, just have however many days the government's in session, make that equal 100. Every time they missed off that, they just lose another percentage point off their pay. Just
I'd support that. Josh and I agree on something. This is great.
I've seen in the past kind of the other solutions that have been put forward is to create kind of like this congressional mutual fund that is basically betting on the whole stock market and transform congressional retirement benefits into that. You do have to serve in Congress for at least a little bit to get retirement. It's 10 years and you have to be over the age of 62 when you to satisfy it. So serve 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. But for the House, it is a bit more. You got to survive 5 elections, and that can actually be pretty difficult. The House can be
I'm
pretty
okay
volatile.
with that. I'm okay with needing to have your job meet a certain threshold for the people in order to keep doing that.
Well, and I think it's also worth noting, it's not just that Congress enriches itself from the knowledge they have. There have been several people who weren't millionaires when they entered Congress. No one's retired not a millionaire from Congress. Although, if you can work a job for several years making $150,000 plus and you don't retire a millionaire, you're bad with money. But I regress.
With stock options.
So there's better there can be better ways, whether it's forcing them to bet on the American economy through like this mass mass bet, or ways of diminishing their pay. All this kind of just revolves around of making um, Congress responsible to the public in a more adaptive and controllable way. Even though this, still doesn't do anything about super PACs funding their elections, so corporate influence is still going to be heavily, featured in our, government and our politics. There's ways to regulate and control. And now that I've regained my train of thought, remember what I was saying earlier, people join Congress usually come from means. There are very few Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who were bartenders who got elected. Most of them were semi-prominent community members, either local business owners, sometimes congressional leaders or religious leaders. You get canvassed to run for office. Someone from the local state party will reach out to you and be like, hey, we've been looking for people to run. Would you be interested in running in this election? And then maybe you move up to a bigger office and a bigger office. And, they scout talent. And so a lot of these people already come from positions of means when they come into office. And so it's not just an outcome disparity that Congress has. There's just, as we, I think Marcel pointed out, a lot of these people went to Harvard Law together. There's not a lot of everyday people getting elected to Congress anymore. And so you're always kind of dealing with usually even the moderately wealthy to extremely wealthy in Congress from the get-go. So it is difficult, and there has to be, there needs to be more ways to oversee it and to penalize them for it. I think having them bet on the economy kind of as a writ large thing is good, and that's kind of what blind trusts and only allowing them to invest in treasury bonds and diversified mutual funds does. So it's somewhat affecting that, but it doesn't touch kind of their compensation structure.
I'm looking for the name of the new New Jersey congressional member, more like it wasn't U.S. Congress, it was state level. But he was a trucker. He spent like $250 on his campaign, and he's in. And his interview, they asked him, what's the first thing you're going to do? He's like, I don't know. He said, I'm going to get there. I'm going to assess the situation, see what my constituents need, and then I'm going to do it. And like, there were people who thought this was a terrible answer. They're like, he's not qualified. And to me, that was a great answer. Like, I would want more people representing us in there where they are not everything Josh just mentioned. They're not tied into the deep pockets of the people who just keep reelecting new faces with the same thing for theater. They are instead more sensitive to their constituents. They are the AOC, like you mentioned, grassroots type who are in there now. Like, I think that would be a much better place for Congress. Marcelo, talk to me a little bit about what you think. Do you think that Josh's class policy that I support, you don't show up, you don't do your job, you get docked? Like, I'm trying to think. I can't think of downsides. Do you have downsides?
I think here's another hot take. I think we're just doing all the hot takes before the actual section, but it's like I want Congress people who are not babies, who can actually, who would just, like, I would go to class even if I wouldn't get deducted. There was like little to no attendance policy, and yet I would still go to class, mainly because my mom would make me. But even then, I want to believe that I would still go to class, even if nothing else mattered. But obviously, that's wishful thinking, right? And same with what you're saying, right? Like, we love the idea of an outsider, of a guy who it's like grew up from nothing, and he's like, I'm gonna run to Congress, and it's like this huge, amazing story of overcoming challenges or whatever. I wouldn't mind having a Harvard Law graduate be my representative, as long as they did a good job and listened to the people, right? The problem comes when these things seem to be disassociated so much, right? It's like, I don't really care where you come from. I don't really care what you do. And actually, maybe I'll go a little bit against your trucker story. And it's like, I would actually want someone who already comes with a plan, right? Already comes with like, okay, I know what the situation is. I've worked in this. Like I come from grassroots organizing, and I know what I want to do when I get into office, and that's why I'm running for office, and that's why I'm here. So now someone passionate enough that has a plan on how to do it, and I wouldn't mind having any of those people or anyone at all, as long as they did a good job on listening to the people. But again, maybe I'm asking for too much. That's
I do think that what you're mentioning is a good halfway point. I think for me, I am at the point where I'm just ready to sweep house. I've started. We've started with the idea that it's great to have people who are in the know. What we have right now is people who are in the know and they know how to play politics. They don't serve the people. So I don't know, you have overcorrection, right? Like we're way over here with people who are very knowledgeable about how to be political, but they're not doing things for the people. I think what you're mentioning, Marcel, would be a great middle ground where they are there with a plan and not falling into the chasm of I'm there with a plan and my plan is to just run to be elected. And over here, I don't know. I think it's an interesting shakeup. I mean, it does go back to what the founding fathers originally were. Like the premise of Congress was you go, you serve your country, you go back to normal life. Like there wasn't supposed to be career politicians. Then we moved up a little bit. We had people who they stayed because they wanted to do a good job. And now we just got people who stay because they want to have that job.
I think there's value in people saying, like, I'm not going to argue against term limits because I think that that's a good idea. But there's also like a lot of value in people knowing how the system works. Because the system is so damn confusing and so damn complicated that like having people who have been there for decades allows you to do things that you wouldn't be, like a fresh, fish out of water wouldn't be able to do.
Yeah.
So being in the know is an advantage sometimes. It's just that when you use all of the institutional knowledge to block things that you don't want to pass because of your interest. And sort of like going back to the stocks question, and I think it was something that Josh mentioned a little bit ago, but it's like, we're trying to do this, or we're in favor of this, and most people are in favor of this, not only because of the corruption that inherently comes from knowing what the things are, but like, what if a bill comes that is going to, like, I don't know, nationalize a certain medicine, right? But you have stocks in the medicine, and so you know that the stock is going to plummet, but you want to keep it. You're inclined to vote against that bill because of what personal gain would come to you if that bill failed, right? So now you're mixing your personal interest with the financial components of a bill that might pass. So there's components that, like, yes, the bill, like, Congress affects your money, but also your money could actually end up affecting Congress. So the other way around. So everything is just a whole circle of corruption that we're trying to avoid in the first place, right?
So I'll disagree with everyone where we're at in the current conversation. So I'll take a surprising turn and take coming from me is I don't think congressional term limits are a good idea. I think executive term limits are necessary, but legislative term limits, not great. There is a way to get someone out of office. It's called an election. You don't need a law removing someone's chosen representative from them. The House and the Senate are done regionally and by state for a reason. It's so the people living there can choose who they want to represent them, and they should have the freedom to choose who they want, make what mistake they want. If they want some person who's been in there 30 years for them, that's fine. It's your representative. That's on you. But I will say that, and then I'll disagree with Ryan and say that we do need, there's professional politicians do work out, because there's been some unique look at different state houses and the efficacy of state houses and the kind of civil service, completeness and reparatedness provided to a state by the legislators. Because as I mentioned, a lot of Congress comes from means before they get there. That's even more so true in a state house because, and like in Tennessee, for example, I think here too in Mississippi, the state legislative jobs, they're part-time positions. In Tennessee, I think if you're in the House of Representatives, I think it's like $24,000 that you get paid as your yearly salary. There is no travel stipend, there's no gas, there's no hotels. So you now have $24,000 to reside in Nashville for 6 months a year on top of your job. But hope you can keep it when you're in Nashville 6 months a year. attending your legislative sessions. So you miss a lot of legislative sessions because you have a job, because you can't survive on $24,000 a year that the state's paying you. And so not only do we, in that way, economically gatekeep a lot of people out from running from office, because they wouldn't be able to sustain their life if they had both the responsibilities of their job and of being in the legislature. But it also makes it so that a lot more bad decisions get made at the state levels in comparison to the federal level. Like when you go back and like look into like, government passed this bill to build roads and maintain them. There's a reason the interstates have less potholes than your local state road. There is some level of efficiency of knowing kind of what you're doing that comes with being in the profession for a long time. It's there's an artisan, you can have an artisan politician who's been doing it for a really long time, really knows the game, really knows how to talk to the people. And there's something to be said about that and how they can bring value to our society in their own way of statescraft.
Final thoughts before we move on to hot takes. All right, then we will be right back with our hot takes. Hooray for not hitting the wrong horn in the new year yet. All right, so I will go first. So my first hot take: Congress should be out of the stock market. I feel like that's a little lukewarm for takes because we've been pretty much in agreement for that for most of our discussion, but I think it is downright corrupt for the people who are pulling the strings of our economy, who are privy to information that gives them an advantage. It is corrupt for them to also be personally investing in the stock market or having their spouses invest in the stock market, because then there are people who are in the know making those decisions. I think that, like Josh had mentioned earlier, if you have something more like a general stock portfolio that is speculating on the entirety of the market and is a collaborative pool, I think you would see a lot more of policies that are geared towards the benefit and flourishment of the economy as a whole, which means that their constituents would be benefiting along with them rather than just them having the information that they need. I think also them being out of the stock market would remove the perception of corruption or the perception of these double standards, because you saw a lot of congressional members putting money into Pfizer. Doesn't mean that the vaccine was not working, but you're pretty much just giving fodder to people who are saying, well, clearly this is just governmental incentive. You're giving them ammunition that they don't need. Trust of Congress, like Marcella mentioned. My second hot take is that this is corruption and it is an incentive to be corrupt. My last hot take is don't idolize representatives. They are elected officials to do a job. These people should not be people that you hold up as heroes. They are supposed to be public servants. And in my opinion, they should be held to that standard. Like Josh mentioned, vote them out. Until Congress passes their term limits, vote them out. Put people in there who are actually going to represent you.
I think I'll start with another, like a lukewarm hot take, just like Ryan, just a lukewarm take is that, yeah, this is a good idea. Congress should not be allowed to hold individual stocks by themselves. It should pool. Everything should be pooled. I'll say that obviously, trust in our representatives is like an all-time low, I feel. And I hope that with this, more people come to realize that none of them are working for you. None of them, not even in your party. I see that a lot. I'm not gonna get all both sides here, but I do see that from people who are they are corrupt. My party wouldn't do this to us, right? Because they support us. No, everybody does it. And I think the sooner people realize that, the better. You do have to end up making a choice, and obviously I've made my choice in which party I support. I think it's always important to remember that these people, we should just try to just elect better politicians. That's the only, vote them out, vote the bad ones out, vote the good ones, and hopefully try to make it better throughout our elections. Finally, I 100% agree with the pooling all of the money together in like the same pool and the same fund, and then they don't get to invest in Pfizer or Microsoft or whatever. They get to invest in the greatest company of all, the United States.
Yeah. So we have the church and state separation, but we need a church or not in a church market. We need a state and market separation as well. And that is, if we're going to be stuck in this capitalist playground that we're all having so much fun in, then the government needs to act as referee to keep everyone safe, to keep everything fair. And if the government has vested interest in particular people winning and particular people losing, that creates inherent unbalances coming from the referees, and no one likes that in a game. It taints like the fundamental whatever free hand spirit of the market we want to talk here. If you believe in it, it gets hurt by this thing. And so you need to separate the government out from it to make decisions that are going to protect the interests of the American people and foster prosperity for everyone. Because it's bad enough that they take partisan action, and it's bad enough that senators will bicker over certain lines of legislation to get certain exceptions and benefits for their states over other people's states, and that our government can't actually work together, work for everyone. But when the market gets involved, and all of a sudden the government's picking and choosing favorites of who wins the game of the economy. And in an era of when there's super PACs who are funding and providing literal billions of dollars for campaign advertisement nowadays, then we got to be really concerned that their elected politicians are able to profit from the companies who donate to their super PACs so they can successfully get elected. Yeah, vote them out. But we have to wonder, why can we never vote them out? Well, there's this monolith of political structure and money that keeps kind of an inertia moving forward, and it's two sides of the same coin of freeing up our elections from campaign influence and freeing up our sitting officials from market influence. Just prevent it from happening, remove the temptation, and allow them to not even be worried about it as they conduct their business. That is a way to get closer to a government that has people's real concerns at their hearts, and not, whatever's going to make them more money.
All right, well, I'm sure you find yourself somewhere between the liars. Join us next week. In the meantime, once you finish this episode, you can go and check out the music by Andrew Inslee. Check it out. All right, we will catch you back here next week. Goodbye for now.